Deep in the ancient forest of Windsor, on the coldest nights of winter, something rides. A figure on horseback, crowned with great stag antlers, chains rattling through the dark. The sound of hooves on frozen ground, and then silence. Those who claim to have seen him say there's no mistaking what he is. Not a man, not quite. Something older, something that refuses to leave. His name is Herne the Hunter, and his story begins not with a ghost, but with a man. Welcome back to Golden Cattle Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. If you enjoy stories of hauntings, folk heroes, and forgotten pasts, consider subscribing and stick around, because this one goes deep. Our story begins in Berkshire, England, specifically in Windsor Forest, a vast royal hunting ground that has stood since before the Norman conquest. For centuries, this forest was not merely a place of trees and streams. It was power. It was prestige. To hunt here was a privilege reserved for royalty and their most trusted servants. To poach here was, in some eras, punishable by death. Picture it. Dense, sprawling woodland threaded with streams and carpeted in fallen leaves. The fog rolls in thick off the Thames. The canopy is so heavy that even midday feels like dusk. This was a place where superstition and reality blurred easily, where shadows took on shapes and the sound of hooves in the dark could mean almost anything. It is in this world, medieval England caught between Christian doctrine and older, deeper beliefs, that the legend of Herne the Hunter was born. To understand Herne, first we need to understand the world that made him. Medieval England was a place of rigid hierarchy. The forest was the king's domain, and those who worked within it lived and died by royal favor. One misstep, one accusation, true or false, could end a man's life, or if the legends are to be believed, begin a very different kind of existence altogether. According to folklore, Herne was a huntsman in the service of King Richard II, who reigned from 1377 to 1399. By most accounts, he was exceptional at his craft, skilled, loyal, and trusted above the other men of the forest, and it was precisely that trust that made him a target. The story goes that the other huntsmen, consumed by jealousy, conspired against him. They accused Herne of poaching on the king's own land, a grave offense, an act of treachery against the crown itself. The accusation was, according to the legend, entirely false, but the damage was done. Stripped of his position, his honor, and his place in the world he had devoted his life to, Herne fell into profound despair, and one winter's night, in the heart of Windsor Forest, he walked to the great oak tree, the tree that would forever after carry his name, and he hanged himself from the branches. But that is not where the story ends. It is, in many ways, where it begins. In another version of the tale, Herne met his end completely differently. He was fatally wounded while saving King Richard from a charging stag, a moment of supreme loyalty that cost him everything. A wandering magician, the story says, appeared and performed a dark ritual to save him. He cut the antlers from the dead stag and bound them to Herne's head. Herne survived, but the other huntsmen, still jealous, whispered that the magician had transferred Herne's skills into the stag's antlers. And so, when the antlers were later removed, Herne found himself unable to hunt. His gift was gone. Disgraced, directionless, and stripped of the only identity he had ever known, he returned to the forest and did not come back. What rose in his place was something else entirely. Herne the Hunter is said to ride at night, particularly during storms and the long, dark nights of winter. He appears as a spectral figure, antlered, cloaked, chains rattling at his side. Sometimes he rides a black horse through the trees, sometimes he manifests as a giant stag itself, crashing through the undergrowth. Those who hear him describe the rattling of chains, the thundering of hooves, and the unnatural silence that falls over the forest just before he appears. And seeing him, the old stories warn, is never a good sign. Now here's where things get interesting, because while the legend places Herne firmly in the court of Richard II, history offers us a very different candidate. In the 19th century, scholar James Halliwell Phillips identified a historical document referencing a man named Richard Horne, a yeoman hunter during the reign of King Henry VIII, roughly a century after Richard II. This Horne had confessed to poaching in Windsor Forest, which fits a number of the legend's themes remarkably well. Whether Herne and Horne are the same man, corrupted across centuries of oral telling, remains genuinely unknown. The earliest written account of Herne comes not from a historic record, but from a play. In 1597, William Shakespeare wrote about Herne in The Wives of Merry Windsor, a comedy, notably not a horror story. In Shakespeare's version, Herne is described as a spirit who haunts a particular oak in Windsor Forest, wearing great ragged horns. It's a brief mention used for theatrical effect, but it tells us something crucial. By the late 16th century, Herne the Hunter was already a well-known enough local figure that Shakespeare could reference him and expect his London audience to understand. Nearly 200 years later, in the late 1700s, writer Samuel Ireland expanded slightly on Shakespeare's description. But for most of the intervening centuries, Herne's story had not lived in books, but in mouths, passed from one generation to the next, shifting and deepening as oral traditions do. And this raises the questions that historians and folklorists have wrestled with ever since. Who or what is Herne really? Some scholars suggest he is a local echo of a much older archetype, the wild huntsman, a figure found in folklore across the Germanic and Norse worlds. In these traditions, a spectral rider leads the host of dead through the winter sky, bringing chaos, storms, and ill omens in his wake. The wild hunt appears in German, Scandinavian, and Celtic traditions alike, suggesting it may tap into something very ancient in the European imagination. Others proposed a more specific origin. The name Herne, some argue, may derive from the Gaulish deity Cernunnos, the horned god of nature, wild things, and the underworld. Through centuries of linguistic drift, Cern could have become Herne, meaning simply horned. Alternatively, the name may be a corruption of Hernian, a title associated with Wotan, the Germanic god of the wild hunt himself. In this reading, Herne is not a ghost at all. He is a memory, a remnant of pre-Christian religious beliefs half buried by centuries of Christianity that fully refuse to disappear. The forest, too old to be tamed, the god, too ancient to be forgotten. Whether Herne is a tormented spirit or surviving deity, the superstitions that surround him are remarkably consistent. He is considered a harbinger of misfortune. His appearance in the forest is said to blight cattle. They give blood in place of milk. Crops fail. He is not a mischievous ghost or an ambiguous omen. He is a warning, a signal that something destructive is coming. Major change, ruin, upheaval. And yet, over the centuries, that same fearsome figure has been claimed by English culture as something almost beloved. In 1897, composer Sir Arthur Sullivan featured the legend of Herne the Hunter as part of his ballet Victoria and Merry England, a celebration of British folklore staged for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. The spectral huntsman of Windsor was, by then, considered fit for royal entertainment. Herne has been woven into literature across the centuries. Two of Lloyd Alexander's characters in the Chronicles of Prydain seem directly inspired by him. The villainous horned king with his antlered skull mask, and Gwyn the Hunter, a supernatural herald of death. Terry Pratchett, with characteristic wit, gave us Herne the Hunted in his Discworld series. The small, nervous god of all creatures fated to end up as, quote, a brief, crunchy squeak, unquote. It's parody, but one born of genuine affection for the source material. Herne has also been connected to other great figures of English folklore. He appears sometimes in the shadow of Robin Hood, sharing the archetype of the outlawed man of the forest, driven from society and transformed into something mythic by the injustice done to him. He is also linked to the Green Man, that ancient moss-covered face peering from medieval church carvings, guardian of the wild places, symbol of nature's indifference to human power. In more recent decades, Herne has had something of a cultural renaissance. The 1984 to 1986 British television series Robin of Sherwood is perhaps the most influential modern retelling. In this version, Herne is not merely a ghost, but a living mythical forest deity, a horned guardian who chooses Robin of Locksley as his champion, the hooded man, the protector of the forest against Norman tyranny. This interpretation introduced Herne to an entirely new generation and cemented the shamanic, spiritual reading of the legend in popular consciousness. Patrick Ness's 2011 novel A Monster Calls draws heavily on the Green Man and Herne archetypes, presenting a vast, ancient forest creature that confronts a grieving child with brutal, necessary truths. The monster does not comfort, it demands honesty, it is nature, and nature does not lie. More recently, Zoe Gilbert's 2022 novel Mischief Acts placed Herne at the center of the story entirely. And in music, the legend has inspired everything from a Victorian ballet to an early instrumental track by progressive rock band Marillion to a devotional hymn by folk artist S.J. Tucker. Herne, it seems, has never really left. And as for the forest itself, Windsor Great Park still stands. The original Herne's oak, under which the legend says he died, fell in 1863, but a replacement was planted in 1906, and it still stands today. People still visit it. Some still leave offerings. So what do we make of Herne the Hunter? Was he a real man, a loyal huntsman destroyed by jealousy and injustice, whose story calcified into legend over centuries? Was he Richard Horne, the poacher of Henry VIII's court, his guilt transformed by oral tradition into something more tragic and more grand? Or is he something older? A pre-Christian memory of a horned god dressed in the costume of a medieval ghost story because that was the only language available to people telling him? Perhaps all three, perhaps none. What's striking about Herne is the consistency of his emotional core across every version. A figure of power brought low by betrayal. A man cast out of a world he served faithfully. A presence that returns not out of malice, but out of something it cannot let go of. Whether that's a ghost story, a myth, or a parable about injustice and belonging, something in it clearly resonates. For over 400 years, people have been telling this story, and in every winter, in every storm that passes through Windsor Forest, the old question lingers in the air. Is that just wind in the trees, or is it something older still riding? What do you think? Was Herne a real man, a misremembered deity, or something else entirely? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into folklore and history of England's haunted forest, please give the video a like. It really does help the channel more than you think. And if stories like this are your thing, subscribe. We've got plenty more where that came from. Until next time, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.